Guten Abend. Good evening, everyone. Welcome at the Goethe-Institut. My name is Louisa Rath-John, and I'm the director of the Goethe-Institut Los Angeles. And I'm so pleased to see you all here tonight. For us, we really believe in the power of dialogue and strengthening intercultural relations, be it through art, literature, or culture in any way, especially in turbulent times like these. The question of belonging doesn't seem to be anything new, but the way we approach it seems to have changed drastically in the recent times. So we're extremely excited that Pan America approached us to be a part of this event tonight, and we are grateful that we can host the panel discussion here at the Goethe-Institut. We will be talking about forced journeys, stories of home, displacement, and belonging as part of Pan America's World Voices Festival. And we would like to thank not only Pan America, but also our partners from there he is, Thomas Mann House, our friends and cooperating partners many, many times. We're happy that we can all together bring this event on tonight. I would also like to thank my team, that they made all of this possible, from the chairs that you're sitting on to the cheese, snacks, and everything else that's happening in the background. So thank you very much. And now I would like to pass the word on to Alison Lee, Managing Director of Pan America in Los Angeles. Thank you very much and have a great evening tonight.
The place for literature is built by writers and readers. It's a fragile place in some ways, but an indestructible one.
Writing is very powerful. The freedom to write can unveil the mind.
I think if anything, maybe sometimes we underestimate the power of books.
Stories can make us aware of things that we wouldn't normally contemplate, like grace, like courage.
We actually record our thoughts and imaginations in our world on paper, and we're willing to stand by it.
Art is not entertainment. At its very best, it's a revolution.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the third evening of the 20th anniversary of the Penn World Voices Festival. It is so wonderful to be here at the Goethe-Institut. I have to say that the Institute gets the special recognition of being true bi-coastal partners in this festival, with hosting events both here and Los Angeles. The first time we're hosting here in Los Angeles, but has been longtime partners of the festival in New York. So thank you so much to Louisa and the crew for hosting us this evening and making it all look so easy. My name is Alison Lee, and I am the managing director of the Pan America Los Angeles office. For those of you who don't know much about Pan America, we are a free speech organization that celebrates literature and the power of the written word, but also defends the freedoms that make it possible. And my very first Pan America event was a World Voices Festival in 2022. I wasn't actually working for Penn at the time. I was just like you. I was sitting in one of those seats, and I was just inspired by the power of community, the power of gathering, the power of the free exchange of ideas, and the power that comes when you embrace difference and when you embrace the possibility of imagination. And that's, I think, in particular, what makes the festival so powerful and special, especially in these most precarious times. The festival was founded by Salman Rushdie, who you saw on screen. He is our honorary festival chair this year, in the wake of 9/11. And it came together because writers wanted to create something different in the midst of great turmoil and division in the United States. It was born out of the ethos and desire to encourage America to face outwards and to embrace and learn from the rest of the world, celebrating literature and writers as the ground in which the seeds of international dialogue and communal progress could be sown. And today, during this 20th anniversary World Voices Festival, this mission has never been more important. I think we can all agree that we are in the midst of what feels like an existential moment for free expression, not only in the United States, but beyond. From the sharp increase in book bans over the last few years, the alarming rise in the case of writers who were detained or imprisoned around the world for writing or exercising their freedom of expression and pen just last week, published its latest index, its Freedom to Write Index. I encourage you to go and check it out. It's a very sobering document, but a very important one, and one that has often been a lifeline for writers who have been imprisoned around the world. To really this moment of censoriousness in our own country, in which we have an administration who believes that there is really only one story, which is their own. And we at PEN America and this festival disagree. We will not bow down to that sentiment. Instead, we are going to do what we have always done. We are going to gather, and we are going to read, and we are going to write, and we are going to discuss, because we know the power of stories and storytellers. We know that writers are truth tellers, and that they are the ones that we turn to understand our past and to make sense of our present and to imagine our future. And we know that artistry is what gives voice not just to the difficulties of what we're experiencing today, but it is how we recognize the untapped potential of another tomorrow. So as I already said, this is a bi-coastal festival. Right now, there are events taking place both here in Los Angeles and also in New York. And in Los Angeles, we're very intentionally covering the city. We have thus far been in Culver City at the Venda Museum with our partners there. Last night we were in Beverly Hills. We're glad to be here in MacArthur Park tonight, and tomorrow we'll traverse over to Pasadena at the Huntington Library. And quite intentionally here in Los Angeles, our festival celebrates the unique neighborhoods and cultural communities of this city, because we know that each neighborhood in Los Angeles has a beautiful story to tell. So we cannot do this work alone, and we thank you for joining us here this evening. And by being here and showing up and being a part of the conversation, this is something that I think we all know we need at this moment. We cannot be alone. We must do this work together. And authoritarians know that. They know that truth and imagination, that the free exchange of ideas, that is the enemy. And that's why they come for the writers and the creatives and the intellectuals and the books. For there's no greater power than that of an individual's imagination and then the coming together. And I invite you to join us and become a part of what I like to call the cultural resistance by becoming a member of PEN America. On your bookmarks, you can see a QR code and learn more. We have members across the United States, in chapter cities across the country. We have robust activities and programs and workshops, not just for writers, but for readers here in Los Angeles. So please encourage you to learn more and become a member of PEN America. I want to recognize the Thomas Mann House and Oliver, who's with us tonight, our other community partner in this evening's program. It's particularly significant that we gather together for this conversation about forced journeys as part of the 150th birthday celebration of writer and Nobel laureate Thomas Mann. Mann wrote so many of his most important works from exile, many right here in Los Angeles. And we are pleased that the Penn World Voices Festival is able to recognize his enduring legacy as we continue to grapple with the challenges facing global democracy and freedom of expression as we celebrate the power of literature. The World Voices Festival in Los Angeles would not be possible without the support of the Herb Alpert Foundation, the California Council for the Arts, the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Cultural Affairs, and the Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs. And with that, I could not be more thrilled to have a member of our PEN America Board of Trustees with us this evening to introduce our conversation and our panelists. Please welcome Allison, Mark, and Paul.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you to the Goethe-Institut. I'm delighted to welcome you all. It's a profound honor to be able to introduce tonight's panel. I feel like there's a special resonance to this panel here in Los Angeles, especially, since the time that you may have started planning this panel to what happens now. Forced journeys, stories of home, displacement, and belonging takes on different meaning now here. As Allison said, I'm a literary translator. I have long been drawn to voices that traverse borders, geographic, linguistic, and emotional. The authors and artists joining us tonight embody that spirit of crossing and recrossing boundaries, each illuminating the complexities of identity, memory, and the meaning of home in their own powerful ways. Charmaine Craig, author of the acclaimed novel Miss Burma, draws from her own family's history to tell the story of a nation's struggle through the lens of personal trauma and resilience. Her mother, a beauty queen turned revolutionary, anchors a narrative that spans colonialism, civil war, and the quest for self-determination. Héctor Tobar, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and novelist, brings us The Tattooed Soldier, a haunting tale set in pre-riot Los Angeles and Guatemala during the years of military dictatorship. Through his characters, he explores the lingering scars of violence and the search for justice across continents. Lara Aburamadan, a Palestinian visual artist and journalist, offers a lens into life in Gaza through her photography and storytelling. As the founder of Refugee Eye, she seeks to humanize the experiences of Palestinians, capturing moments of beauty and resilience amidst the devastation of war. Moderating our conversation is Ipek S. Burnett, a Turkish-American author and depth psychologist whose work delves into the psychological underpinnings of social and political issues. Her insights will guide us through the intricate interplay of exile, creativity, and the longing for belonging. Together, these voices will explore how displacement shapes identity, how the concept of home evolves, and how storytelling becomes a means of survival and resistance. I invite you to engage deeply with their narratives, to reflect on your own definitions of belonging, and to consider the myriad ways in which our stories intersect. Thank you for joining us for this evening of reflection, dialogue, and shared humanity.
Good evening and welcome. I want to start by extending a heartfelt thank you to the team, PEN America, for making this festival a reality and helping us gather here this evening to reflect on, explore some of the most complex and profound dimensions and questions of human existence. What it means to belong, to journey in search of new lands, to create relationships and meaning across borders, generations, across history. So Héctor, Lara, Charmaine, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I'm deeply honored to be in conversation with you all as we explore this and how it is for you to write, to capture, to remember and reimagine belonging in a time when the world is marked by war, forced displacement, systemic oppression, systemic persecution, xenophobia. Your work reminds us again and again that none of this is just political. It's deeply, deeply personal. So I invite everyone here this evening to hold space for that, for the emotional, for the intimate, for the personal and the cultural, as we are diving into some of the political, social political realities. With that, let's dive in. I want to start with a seemingly simple question for each of you. If you can tell us perhaps an image or a memory of home, what home means to you.
Well, since I'm the native Angelino here, one of the native Angelinos here, when I think of home, I think of Herald Way in Hollywood and Los Angeles. We had a long discussion about Herald Way. And I think about the jade plants, and I think about the soot from the Hollywood freeway, covering my neighborhood. I think about the incredible ethnic and racial diversity in my neighborhood, which is now called Little Armenia. I grew up with Armenian kids and also Filipino kids and Eastern European exiles from Czechoslovakia, other countries that don't exist anymore. And I think of home as this place of incredible variety. And also in the 20th century, in the late, great 20th century, as a place of incredible hope and growth and possibility. And now, of course, I think of home as a place of incredible inequalities. Los Angeles has, in my lifetime, become a city of just so-called third world. I'm sorry to use that phrase, but the inequalities of the developing world, but not just that, the mentality of the developing world has taken root in this country, the mentality of hierarchical class structures, So this place that is so full of sunshine and avocado trees where you can get ripe avocados any time of the year, it's this sort of permanent springtime in Los Angeles, now has this sort of permanent winter that we're living through. So to me, that's the paradox of home for me.
I was born in New York. My mother was from Burma, the country now known as Myanmar. My father was a WASP. There was a lot of cultural, frisson between them, little difference, translational difficulties between them. But they came west 3 months after I was born to this area because they felt that there was a better shot of being accepted as an interracial couple. And weirdly, on the way here tonight, I drove by the place where we lived on Westmoreland until I was 4 or so, and we moved to Culver City. But, I think that when I think of home, it's really my mother's sisters and their children. My mother, they all came as refugees to this country and couldn't go back to Burma for political reasons. My mother had a price on her head. She was a named enemy of the state. And so growing up in Los Angeles in the 70s, when kids asked, "What are you?" and I would say, I was taught to self-identify as Karen, which is the largest ethnic minority group, or one of them in Burma, one of Burma's indigenous peoples, my mother's people. And I would say Karen to the little kids that I met in LA, and they would say, "You mean Korean, right? You don't know what you are." So there was a way that I felt ethnically erased a little bit, to be honest, by others. They'd never even heard of Burma, the kids I met. But with my mother's family, we coexisted, like they knew who we were. And none of us could go back. So we were all sort of in a sort of liminal space together, but they were home.
Home, what is home? Hi. I arrived to the US almost 8 years ago, and this question, what is home? Who am I? I mean, that was a current kind of reoccurring question. What is home? What is home? And try to find that through maybe like my photos or through like working on art. But I remember that this question took almost 3 to 4 years, questioning what is home. I mean, like I grew up in Gaza, so like I should know what is home. But moving and having to leave home kind of shake the whole idea of what is it? Is it physical? Is it emotional? Is it spiritual? Is it what? What is it exactly? And eventually, I think it started where memories, like once like I started feeling safe or like started settling and now thinking, okay, now I am in my second home that I am now living in Berkeley. Made me think, okay, what is home? What am I missing? And then there is those thoughts or smells and, these senses that you would think of home. Home is where my grandparents are living, where we used to sleep every Thursday night over there with my siblings and spend the night there, and where my grandma would cook us, all these delicious meals. Home is the beach in the summer where we go every, weekend and enjoy the summer sunsets, and we would smoke hookah on the beach and listen to Kulthum, who's an Egyptian classic, music singer. So those things, those little things is, I think home is senses, and home is where your loved ones are, and home is where I am. Wherever I go is home. I carry home with me. And yeah, I miss home.
Thank you all so much for that. I so appreciate everything I heard, because it's that idea of home, right? It is so open. It is not static, not singular. We heard so much plurality, complexity, layer, and fluidity. There is movement. It's not one place at one time. And all of you with your work too, you move. You move across borders, across languages and generations. I'm curious, I would love to hear from each of you again. In your work, when you move across borders, histories, generations, you're moving back and forth and sometimes beyond. You're not in one place in one time. So you're traveling imaginally, in a way, through your imagination, senses, emotions. How was that movement for you, for your sense of identity? Because a lot of times when people ask us about our identities, we have our short answers, right? I'm Turkish, I'm Turkish American, they're boxes. But I hear so much fluidity in your description of the home, so I'm curious how your creative movements influence or inspire your understanding of your own identity.
Well, I think it's a gift to have the multiple perspective of an immigrant or a refugee or an exile. I mean, of course, there is the tragedy of displacement and the violence of it. Obviously, these are horrible things. But as a child, to be someone who has roots in another distant country, my parents, witnessed a coup d'état in Guatemala, the rise of a dictatorship, the repression. My father, one of his, teenager, witnessed a massacre in downtown Guatemala City. But me growing up in Los Angeles, I have this sense that as powerful as Los Angeles is, because in Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s was a mesmerizing place. It was like at the height of its power as a global city and influence, that even that powerful place wasn't the center of the world, And so it teaches you a kind of, it teaches you about humanity, your humanity. And then you see that reflected in other people. You see that reflected in the people you meet. So Los Angeles is a city where dozens of diasporas meet, right? The Palestinian diaspora, the Southeast Asian diaspora, the Ottoman Empire diaspora. I've interviewed people who, left in a long time ago. I remember as a reporter interviewing someone who had, was in exile from the Ottoman Empire. So that, and what happens is that this is such a powerful place, Los Angeles. Americans equate bilingualism with working class status. Okay, so in the United States, if you speak more than one language, it usually means that you're a child of working class immigrants. In Europe, if you speak more than one language, it usually means you're a member of the intelligentsia, or you're Dutch. because the Dutch speak everything. And so it's because there's a really provincial mentality in the United States. Of course, now it's ruling the country, that provincial mentality. But, and so to me, that's this incredible gift of like that life is a journey, and that's like the main lesson of being someone who is an exile or an immigrant, is that life is a journey. So I don't know if that helps.
I would agree with what you said. I've always had this sense that not belonging in a certain group, being a person of mixed race, let's say, being the child of a refugee who couldn't go back, that it afforded me an outsider status that made me skeptical of group dynamics and made me make me fiercely interested and curious about the perspectives of others, which I think is probably why I ended up a fiction writer. And so I remember, receiving this gift I felt of my mother's story and her inheritance, and yet it felt very much like my story as her daughter, and yet could I write that story as an outsider or not? Did I have permission to? I had a lot of anxiety about that. But to answer your question, I think that the process of doing that, taking that perspectival leap and that risk, and honestly being very warmly received by all the people I interviewed and talked to for the book, and very lovingly kind of received also when the book came out, it did shape my identity. I remember after the book came out, somebody asked me inside Burma, what are you? Are you American or are you Karen? And I said, I'm both. And he said, wrong answer, you're Karen. But it was interesting that the process of writing the book made me more secure about sort of my hybridity, I guess. Is that a word? Thank you.
Okay, so we're talking about identity and talking about fluidity. When I think of identity, I think that that's something I never actually questioned or thought about when I grew up back in Gaza. And I don't think that anyone would back then, would think about specific, identity specifically regarding the identity of your home, your family, your, label and anything, where you come from. Of course, we are familiar with all these backgrounds and history of how we are here. So when I think of identity now coming here to the US, for example, I'm wearing a necklace with Palestine map. When I was in Gaza, I would never think to wear a Palestine map, necklace. Why would I? I am already in Palestine. But coming here, this is where it feels kind of, okay, I need to get closer. I need to be identified or perceived as or seen as, or at least maybe this is how I would, with the physical things that I would carry around will remind me of home or remind me of my identity. Identity, I don't perceive it as my own. Identity is all my ancestors, is my parents, are my parents, is everyone that I've met and been around in my life, and this is what shapes my identity. And coming to the US is not something that shaped my identity in a specific way. Of course, it added to it. It's been already before, and even before I was born, the identity is something for me collective. And to be a Palestinian, specifically from Gaza, I think with all the things that I have experienced, of course it shaped my identity. It shaped my experience. And I think in here we can discuss, okay, identity is experience, is things that you have witnessed, things that your generations before you have witnessed already. And okay, so what is it? I am all of them, and I am all of us, This is how I would think of identity. I mean, yeah, it's existing and being and moving in the world between people and thinking about my experiences that I have witnessed and, wearing this folklore vintage thobe that's made by an old Palestinian woman who doesn't exist anymore right now, but her work does. And this is identity, is art, is touch, is stories, and that keeps coming and coming, and experiences that doesn't fade. So identity is the past and the present and the future, and it's all of us, I guess.
We're in such deep waters, right? I deeply appreciate all your reflections, and I feel like since we already have the ancestors called upon, I want to turn to you, Charmaine, and ask you, because you started talking about your book, Miss Burma, already. So if you don't mind, let's continue with that. In that novel, you draw from your own family history of exile and ethnic persecution. So I would love to hear more about your process of writing that book and how you balance the historical and emotional truths.
Well, I think I have to answer in two parts. The first part is that I wrote two versions of this book. The first version over the course of 15 years. So the first 7 years were taken up writing a version in which I was actually very actively not wanting to look at the historical. I think that coming up in this country, really kind of absorbed the bias against the political novel and even the historical novel. And so I didn't want to write it. I wanted to tell my mother's story and an emotional story about, for example, the inheritance of generational trauma, about immigration, about the effects on a mother-daughter relationship of those things, that was purely emotional and purely about a relationship, divorced of the history. I think in a way I felt a little bit resentful of having to perform that identity. Like, why should I have to tell the story of Burma and the Karen people just because I'm one of the only Karen writers, maybe, right, at that time at least, in this country. But the book, I wrote a couple versions, and it just wasn't taking off. And at a certain point, certainly the more I learned about, so just as a little backstory, my mother's people, the Karens, in their centuries of enslavement, this was before the colonial era. Their hands were cut off if they were found with writing implements, so that they couldn't write, and they actually eventually lost their historical texts, their spiritual texts, their alphabet, so they couldn't write anymore. And the more I learned stories like that, truths like that, the more I learned about the United States' covert role in this suppression of and liquidation of the attempted liquidation of the minority peoples of Burma, etc., the more I realized I needed to, that I had sort of two duties. And in a way that I needed to get over myself and get over the idea that I didn't have a duty as a Karen person and as my mother's daughter. I also had a duty to myself as an artist. And that person was interested in moral complexity in the realm of consciousness and interpersonal dynamics and unresolvable questions. And so writing the book became a kind of, I want to say dance, but really it was more like a battle between these two sides of myself, these two duties. One is the daughter of my mother and the Karens, and this person almost like with the documentarian / investigative journalist / historian hat on, that felt like, I've got to do this. There was almost nothing out there, really pretty much nothing even in scholarly literature about the minority perspective in Burma historically, and certainly not the Karens. But then this other side of me, the artist. So the book, how did I balance it? Just a lot of struggle, I think, and tenacity, maybe.
I love that you keep coming back to this idea of inheritance. inheritance of the story of both loss and resilience, and going around this idea of responsibility, right? You said duty, but it's like ethical responsibility. I would love to hear a little more about that. And also, in this challenging, taking this task on, in the challenge, what was the gift, if there was one, or pleasantly surprising turn of events for you, whether it's for your work or personal or your relationship with the inherited stories?
There were so many. My mother passed away in 2010, and as part of the process, I interviewed her for 2 years. What a gift to have that chance to talk to her about, openly, frankly, about her life, her past, also her sisters, also many, many Karens. I consider all of that to have been an enormous gift. But the other side of it was post-publication. I think that in some sense to write any book, you have to almost forget about, you're communicating to readers, you're trying to be clear, but at the same time, if you think too much about reactions, you're not going to be bold and daring and say what you need to say in a frank and fearless way. And so I think that when I finally finished, I suddenly panicked. What is my family going to think? But also, what are the Karens going to think, both in this country and abroad, and then more generally people in Burma? And that part was also just an extraordinary gift, getting to go with, being invited to refugee communities in the United States. Many of the refugees my mother had helped come to this country, and so even though she was gone, there were these communities that she was part of having brought here. That was so moving in the way that they connected with the book and felt grateful for it, and I felt very fortunate.
Well, thank you so much for your courage, for sticking with it, going deeper and doing the multiple rounds, as it is a gift to everyone. And since we are talking about ethical responsibility, I'm going to turn to you, Lara. I'm going to ask you, and you have the lived experience of exile. You've been here since 2016. And I would love to hear about the both ethical and emotional complexities of bearing witness to, documenting, and sharing Gaza right now.
It's my pleasure to answer that. I think like being a documentary photojournalist and photographer back in Gaza, to give a context, I grew up for both journalist parents. Both my parents were journalists. My father worked in journalism as a reporter for almost 31 years from his life. He grew up in Gaza. He worked, hard as a kid in a poor family, and he roamed all Gaza City on his bike selling newspapers and, meeting some foreigners and speaking, little English with them until he graduated from high school and studied English language and, literature. And at that time, he had a tough childhood, and he grew up through the first Intifada and before, when also like Israel was ruling Gaza, and my mother as well, but she was younger. So growing up in this context and in this household where, as a kid growing up, the phone never stopped ringing. And, we live in Gaza when it's a hot zone. Things are happening the whole time. And in my memory, the first things I have experienced, and as a kid, first horrible traumas. I mean, I would say regarding war and bombs, it was in 2000, the beginning of the second Intifada. So with giving that, as a kid, I was 9 at that time. I was confused. What is happening? What does that mean? Why my body is acting this way? Until, recently I started realizing, oh, that was a response. That was fear. That was things that is still in my body. And at that time, I didn't understand. Something I was thinking about today regarding, the identity and home and also the experience and the responsibility being a survivor here. It's a big thing to feel that I'm a survivor, and survivor guilt doesn't really just leave you alone once you survive. And since after October 7th and what has been happening to my home, watching everything collapsing and getting demolished in front of my eyes, people I know, they don't exist anymore, or everything that I've known about my home and the city is not there. And my father passed away a month before what happened, and things were coming back to back after that. Losing, and being here made me think like, okay, why am I even here? First of all. Second of all, of course, yeah, I'm lucky, but like, is this guilt that I'm feeling means that I'm lucky? And okay, what do I have left from Gaza? Like, my father is not there, my house is not there, my city, my neighborhood, my neighbors, everything I knew is not. So what is my responsibility now? So now I would look back through my hard drive that I haven't touched since almost 8 years, and I'll go through photos I captured since, I started taking photos since 2010, and then finding those beautiful photos of the beach and the sunset and the kids playing in, beach refugee camp in Gaza and all corners of Gaza. And it's like, okay, this is what I know. This is what is still in my memory, but also physically, this is what I have. So I have somehow a responsibility to show something that is not going to be there anymore in Gaza, unfortunately. It's kind of, yeah, this position that I have to be in, where I have those things, and I know that it doesn't, but it does mentally, and it does, with the photos I have captured. So it's definitely something is like I'm still processing. Things are still happening, and I really hope and wish that all of this will stop right now. People don't want to be in this situation. People don't want to lose each other. And in my experience and everyone's experience in Gaza, what I was thinking about today earlier, where, when something is happening, when suddenly we hear, the sound of the drones or the F-16, we're familiar with all the kinds. I can tell you how everyone sounds, each of them sound, how each bomb would sound, how the shake would feel in the building, and in every war that I have survived with my family. But every time this happens, we grow to be more professional at surviving that, in a way, where, okay, keep the windows open, keep the curtains open, or close the curtains, but keep the windows open. So if the glass, broke with the sound, then the curtain will catch it. Once you hear something, all of us get together, get the emergency bag that we have all our documents in, and let's get into the corridor where there is nothing so can be protected, and then pray that either we all survive together or die together. But then we also pray, I hope that none of us would lose the other and have to survive without the other. Imagine, this is what we would think. This is where you are in a situation. This is the least that you are asking for. So responsibility inherent, moving in this world, it's a lot of things to process. It's a lot of things to think about, and to. For now, I'm here. I'm safe. I'm fine. But yeah, I'm thinking about everyone, my family, my extended family who are still there. And yeah, what is my responsibility is to talk and be able to share the beauty of Gaza that I know. And I don't know what else I can do. I wish I know.
Lara, thank you so much for your openness, your transparency. This is very difficult to, I'm sure, speak right now. So we really appreciate you sharing. Having been here since 2016, you know, there's this distance, geographical, and also time, except there's also no distance. It lives in you. But if we were to go back to that perceived distance, has it this time, being here, living here, has it granted you a new artistic freedom or a freedom to speak up, a new creative clarity perhaps about your work as a photojournalist, as a photographer, or has it complicated things, your artistic vision, or what real is?
Thank you for this question. It definitely added. I wouldn't say that I have been as productive as I expect, and I put pressure on myself as an artist, which is like I should produce more photos, I should make more art. But I think it definitely added another element, which is I'm grateful for that. Yeah, because I think my body somehow feels safe, and there is like this physical distance that I'm experiencing. So there is another aspect of it, which is the process, the processing, the journey, or the healing, or the being able to think about those things and experiencing, allowing myself or not allowing myself to experience it and going through it. I think that's something that is important for the artistic practice in a way. Even if I'm not as productive as I'm expecting from myself, but at least the idea of thinking and being able to analyze and remember, and I think it's a process. So I'm looking forward to the point where, you know, I get something out of this process and share it with everyone, you know, in whatever form it's going to come out as. So yeah, thank you.
We all look forward to that, but please don't feel the capitalist pressure of the product, the process, the spiritual and existential creative process is so very important, undervalued, but necessary. So we were talking about, I had raised that question about complicating. So I'm going to turn to you now, Héctor. Both in your fiction and nonfiction, you give voice to, you amplify the voices of Latin American and immigrant experiences, which are so often in this country overlooked, distorted, deliberately erased, silenced. What, in your opinion, is the role of the storyteller in challenging the dominant narratives, especially in this current context of ever-rising anti-immigrant rhetoric?
That's a fantastic question, and that's basically defining my intellectual life right now. I feel this enormous responsibility to use every absolute tool available to me, every intellectual and emotional, artistic craft tool available to me, to do something against the ignorance. The ignorance directed towards the portrayal of Latino people, and especially of immigrant and undocumented immigrant people. To say again and again until I'm blue in the face that really undocumented labor and immigrant labor are the foundation of order in this country. We have this government, and I know we don't want to get too political, but we have this government and we have its ideology, which is an ideology of the immigrant as chaos, the immigrant as a criminal, the immigrant as a force of disorder, and it's an incredible, huge lie, and incredibly ironic, because just here in Southern California, you go to any neighborhood, you go to a place like San Dimas, an upper middle class neighborhood, you go to Pasadena, You go down to Pacific Palisades and you hear the noise of the hammers reconstructing a neighborhood. And that labor is being done by Latino people and by a lot of undocumented people. So there's that, you know. And so it, you know, and also to be absolutely as astute as possible. Because part of the problem is that people are sort of used to hearing stories. And it's our job as artists to surprise people and to show them truths that they don't see. And, you know, and to do that, we have to remain true to the artist within us. So, you know, I'm writing a novel about Los Angeles in the year 2653, you know? And it's a really kind of narcissistic, self-centered kind of thing to do, but it's really what I feel I need to do, you know? And you have to remain true to that because that's what artists have always done. You know, artists living in situations of extreme hatred, ignorance, of just, you know, from Kafka, you know, all the way down to my heroes, Roberto Bolaño, and, you know, et cetera. I could just go on, right? And so I feel a need to be a really good writer, and also to just listen to the moment and to be aware. And to me, I think that the main lesson that I have of this moment is that it's not just an immigrant or Latino issue. We're talking about the future of the Republic. So, for example, you have all of these judges who have been arrested or intimidated because they helped an immigrant, or they were, you know, compassionate enough to allow the immigrant to go out the back door, you know? And you have this sort of threat to the rule of law that's using as its excuse the supposed danger of this, you know, invasion of undocumented immigrants. This is something that has known throughout history, you know, and I've been, you know, I tell people, I've spent like 30, 40 years like obsessed with the Holocaust and Nazi Germany and fascism, and now all of that's becoming really useful because I see patterns, and, you know, and it's not to say there's a moral equivalency between the horrors of Treblinka and the Sonoran border. No. But they're all part of the same story. This is in your work, right? It's the psychological underpinnings of this country that we live in, and all the, you know, all of the wealth and the affluence and where it comes from, you know, and just, you know, hammering that story, hammering the idea of doing a really artistic thing and thinking about the whole truth. So I learned this writing novels. You know, I used to be a journalist, you know, like your dad. I was a journalist, and journalism is an amazing craft because, like you say, you know, there's people coming in from all over the place. But in journalism, you tell a story about an issue, and the people in the story are about the issue. But when you write novels, you have to tell about all this emotional world. And I saw so much as a journalist that made me want to be an artist. And I think that's what happened to you, right? It's like, in part, right? You just saw so much from, you know, as a journalist. And so, and to me, that, you know, that idea of the wholeness of this moment, that it's not just a Latino issue, it's not just a Black Lives Matter issue, it's not just, you know, it's not just an issue of LGBTQ awareness or an issue of Palestine and Gaza. All of these issues are interlinked. And so to me, it's one of the most important things we can do as creative people, as intellectuals, is to find these connections in our stories and to find the common truths. So I don't know if that answers your question. But.
It does, and I actually want to, if I may, stay with it and go a little deeper. What you just said about you're a journalist, so you write both fiction and nonfiction. And you did mention the craft and creative artistic work. Can you talk to us about literature, what literature or how literature in particular can serve this purpose of challenging dominant narratives, disrupting the harmful myths?
Yeah, you know, I've discovered that over the course of, you know, writing that and being at many forums like this one, is that people read for different reasons. And for many different reasons, maybe all at once. And so people read for example, because they want to know facts, Okay, so I'm going to go to a panel about exile, and I'll find something out about it, what exiles think, or how exiles affect, et cetera, okay? But then people read for emotional truths. So you read a novel and you're going to feel a little bit of what it's like to be an immigrant or what it's like to be displaced. But then the other reason why people read is because they love language. And that's literature, And so people love what we do with our crafts, to me, I think when I write, I think all the way back to Dr. Seuss. And then from Dr. Seuss to Neruda, to David Foster Wallace, who's kind of a lunatic poet, and et cetera. I could just go on. And so I think that that life is a mystery. And we're so used to being told things are black and white, and we know that they're not. And so they're so complex. Even, oh my God, I could just go on. The idea of white as an ethnic category is like, oh my God, what a mess that one is, okay? And so part of the job, part of the beauty of our crafts is that we enter into those complications, and it's the complications that are interesting. So you asked at the beginning about how we're all supposed to fit in boxes, right? How that's what ethnicity is, identity is, it's like a box. But we all know that the boxes don't fit us. And so to me, that's part of the beauty of approaching a story as a novelist or as an artist is seeing all the incredible truths and the beauty that are outside of the box.
Thank you. And this is so dear to my heart and current work. So I want to continue with this a little longer and open it to everyone now. This intersection of literature, art, and activism. What do, if any, artists, writers, what role do they have in this moment of political upheaval in the face of misinformation? And I was even trying to tinker with this question. We're talking about fiction, but can fiction be an antidote to misinformation? How can we frame it? So any thoughts, all thoughts, please.
I think what I would jump in and say is that one of the most beautiful parts of literature, in my opinion, what literature is uniquely interested in is perspective. I come to literature as a reader, but also as a writer, in a way for a kind of solace, because in life we can't commingle with another person's perspective, actually. We can talk to them, we can try to guess what their experience is, we can want to empathize, but when we read literature, we actually are experiencing that perspectival leap where we are like doused in another being's, okay, maybe made up, but another being's perspective that might be radically different from our own. And I think that it's so easy in this climate right now to kind of dig into one's own perspective, and just by nature, literature is a very different enterprise.
With all art forms, I think, as expressions in general, either like with literatures, as you're saying, or with art, also for all of them are art in a different way. For me, I think it gives more kind of visibility to the human existence in a way, without labels and boxes in a way. So how does that connect to activism? I think with activism, it can go wrong. And it depends where you are and what are you doing and what are you saying. And it depends in what country and what kind of things you're talking about or trying to express, freedom of speech. It depends, again, where you are. With art, for me, how I practice it is because there are things can become controversial or like political opinion in a specific way, as you know, like as my work in journalism, and also with looking at all these also mainstream agendas with each platform or, you know, agency, and how everyone want to tell their own perspective or their own point of view. So it's never free. It's never saying specific thing or telling the truth in a way. It is truth. It is, as you said, also perspectives. But from my perspective, I think it's, for me, it's safer and it's more fulfilling and it's more honest for me to make art. And this is my activism. And I believe that activism can be anything in any form, and everyone has their own role in that, in the community and in the society. Some people will go out in the street and protest. Some people will make food for those ones who are going out in the street and protesting. And some people will capture photos of those people who are protesting. And some other people will write about those people who are protesting. You know, it's like it's a whole cycle of, yeah, what are we trying to do, and what are we trying to say, and what are we trying to change? And for me, art, in whatever form, this is what we're doing, is also art, in whatever form, is activism and telling the truth and telling your perspective, and just existing and being there for now is activism. Existing, I guess, is activism. Thank you.
Well, and just to echo what both Charmaine and Lara have said, I mean, I remember when I wanted to write my first novel, which is the novel we're supposed to be talking about here, The Tattooed Soldier, which is set in this neighborhood, by the way. It's set in MacArthur Park neighborhood. And I thought of that novel as like an intensely political act. You know, I was going to write about how Los Angeles was a city of empire. And when Guatemalans came here, they brought the wars of the empire to the core, to the imperial city, you know? And I thought that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something very political. But when I started to work on it, I realized that I needed to enter the perspective of all these people. And so the first person who I entered when I wrote that novel was a perpetrator of evil. It was the fascist. It was the soldier. That's the tattooed soldier of my novel. It's the guy who committed these genocidal murders in Guatemala. And so, like, oh my God, how can I enter him? And it actually turned out to be really easy because, well, first of all, I did my research and I read Robert J. Lifton's incredible book about the Nazi doctors, not the doctors who did the selections, and how they psychologically justified, right, being perpetrators of this mass murder, which today is the person operating the drone, or it's the person ordering the missile strike. You know, how do you rationalize that? And I learned a lot from Robert J. Lifton, this incredible, American psychologist who interviewed these Nazi doctors. And so I created this killer, and I did it simply by tapping into my own inner asshole, my own little fascist inside of me. You know, the guy who feels small.
In Jungian psychology, we call it the shadow.
Oh,
you tapped into your shadow. Amazing.
Yeah, so I tapped into my shadow, and that character made that book successful. In fact, it was much harder for me to inhabit his victim. I wasn't as successful, mostly because I was younger, I think, as a writer. But yeah, and so that was really instructive to me. You know, and like today, I apply that same principle. It's like, you know, what is this xenophobic movement? What are its fears? Where is it coming from? You know, when you think that way, when you think like a novelist or an artist about the larger picture, it really does provide some important political insights, I think.
Absolutely. And, you know, you had also mentioned the opposite of that is that ignorance, right? The black and white thinking. And the ignorance is so willful, arrogant, willful ignorance, which always reminds me of James Baldwin's critique, and who is one of my favorite authors of all time. So with that, I want to ask you all if there are any artists, writers who inspire you on this path, and perhaps one that is in exile or displaced, and like James Baldwin was in Paris, also in Istanbul, a lot of the time, yeah, and he was writing from that distance. offering his critique. So anyone that comes to you, visits you when you're working, when you're thinking?
Well, you know, I have a candle in my office that my wife gave me, and it's a candle, like a votive candle for praying, but it's James Baldwin. Because James Baldwin was an incredible thinker. You know, a lot of people, when he was alive, a lot of people didn't think of him as, you know, he was, the word in Spanish, menospreciado. He was belittled, you know, because he was a gay man. And when you look at his social criticism, which is so incredibly insightful and ahead of its time, you know, I think that part of what made James Baldwin so powerful was that he was a kind of outsider in so many different ways. So I realized this when I read Giovanni's Room, which is this novel about a gay white man in France, you know, and it was like, oh my God, you know, this man had so many insights into like patriarchy and just, you know, and just the power of, you know, all this male stuff or the stuff about being, you know, that he applied to understanding white America, you know. And so I think that, so James Baldwin and the range of his interests, you know, he's someone who was an incredible essayist and a beautiful novelist. You know, his novels, Go Tell on the Mountain, Giovanni's Room, they're just really, you know, beautiful works of art. He's someone who I really take a lot of inspiration from, who was also an exile, as you pointed out.
I'll jump on the Baldwin train and just say his thinking about even like privilege and actually the privilege of being the one who's oppressed sometimes, and his subverting just these stereotypes and his use of paradox to get at truth, to kind of upend power dynamics and really look deeply at love and wisdom. And it's just, I always teach Baldwin for all of these reasons, and I'm just so inspired too.
I can't think of like specific, you know, other ones, but what comes to my mind right now are the ones who are on the ground right now, photographers in Gaza. There's Sohail Nassar, who, you know, has been taking photos until now. He didn't leave Gaza for, you know, journalist Hind al-Khudari and for illustrator Bayan Abu Nahla and photographer Rihaf al-Batniji, and more of them. And one more that inspires me and inspired me before, she was killed 3 weeks ago. Her name is Fatma Hassouna. And Fatma was a beautiful photographer. She documented Gaza through her eyes, and she was also a beautiful singer and writer. And yeah, she was 25 years old, and she got killed with all her family when they were asleep. So, you know, those ones I would think about, those are on the ground who inspire me for now. There are a lot of like amazing people around us, inspiring people everywhere. But those ones who are still surviving and still creating art and telling their truth and practicing surviving with grace. And that's something I get inspired by.
Thank you. I find this conversation right now so moving, intellectually, and my heart is full at the same time. I want to make sure, I want to be mindful of time, and I want to make sure that there is plenty of time for everyone else from the audience to speak up, share your questions, comments, reflections with us. So if you have anything in mind, please raise your hand. Yeah.
The expression that you used of being professionals at survival just floored me, because survival is something that's supposed to happen instinctually and once if we're unfortunate enough in our lives. And my heart bleeds for what you've been through, but that phrase just overwhelmed me.
I ask this as a Brit who's come via Hong Kong and has lived here for 20 years. When Americans ask you, where are you from? How do you respond? And what do you think they're really asking?
I wrote a whole book about this, actually. You know, I think that when people say how you're from, where are you from? They're trying to fit you inside a story, the sort of cartoon version of the story of the United States, you know? And so they're trying to place you. Now, a lot of people who look like us get asked that because people they think like they can't fit us in the story. You look like you could, you know, you're Chicana, you know, right? You get a lot of people coming up to you walking Spanish. The other day, I was in a mall and someone said to me, started talking to me in Arabic, salam alaikum, you know? And I had just been in Morocco, coincidentally. And so I don't know if that made me look more like Moroccan for a moment. So I think that people have this very, you know, they're trying to sort of put you into their little textbook understanding, you know? But what we don't know is how cruel those categories are. And, you know, it's interesting to me that almost everybody who is of supposedly mixed, you know, I say this because every term is mixed. Latino is a synonym for mixed, you know. Any national identity is itself a mixture of identities. But people feel like they have to, they feel like they have to apologize. So especially my Latino students, they'll say like, well, you know, I'm Salvador, but my mother's Irish, but my father's from El Salvador, so I don't know what that makes me. You know, and so people are like, they feel sad and they feel a little bit embarrassed and ashamed, you know. And there's, you know, and so to me, it's, and especially when you talk to someone who is white, because that term erases so much, erases these incredible stories that usually go back to some peasant. You know, to like a guy, a German guy in a potato field, you know, an Irish person on a boat, you know, and so, or a Portuguese man in a field. Like I heard the story was from my students, who, you know, was mistaken for being black and never wanted to call himself Portuguese again because of the stigma of being of color, you know. And so all of this is so to me, when someone's asking me that, it's because they're dealing with their own confusion about that a confusion that's been created by a country that's created these categories that make no sense, or that are cruel, or that are used to justify exploitation and expression and oppression, you know, or that we sometimes use. That's the other complicated part of it. Like I told you, I wrote a book about this, which is that we sometimes use them as alliances and resistance. You know, so I meet another Salvadoran person and a Colombian person, we go out to dinner, we're a Latino group, you know, it's an alliance, right? And so, yeah, I'm sorry, that's a really good question.
I want to answer actually like to this question as well. It depends on how I'm feeling, how I woke up, which side of the bed, first of all. And I think right now, sometimes I'm curious. I actually want people to ask me where I'm from because I'm going to tell them from Gaza. Like I want to see like what is their reaction going to be, you know? And some other times when I'm more in a chill mood, I kind of like, okay, let's play this game. Can you guess? Or, you know, it's just whatever you want me to be from, like, you know, just. So, yeah, sometimes I used to feel a little pressured by it, or, you know, I don't want to be classified, but also from my perspective, different probably from anyone else who grew up here in this country. I think maybe it's different for me, you know, as like someone coming from different place, growing up in a different, you know, continent. Sometimes we kind of want this attention, which is where you from, because you have an accent. You know, we always get this. But for me, I get it. It depends on the person also who's asking. But in general, yes, like ask me where I'm from, or like I want you to guess and give me, you're gonna say I'm a Latina, yes, I love it, amazing. You wanna say I don't know, you know, I get different other things, but yeah. So that's how I respond to it.
Hello, my question is for Charmaine. I noticed that you call it Burma, and I'm curious if I could ask why you say Burma as opposed to Myanmar. And do you think it's appropriate for someone who's not from Myanmar or Burma to call it Burma, or to call it Bombay as opposed to Mumbai, and how you feel about those changing of names. Just because for example, I visited Mumbai and met this really wonderful woman who helped me when my ATM card got stuck in the machine. And she kept saying, I'm from Bombay, I'm from Bombay. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting how she identified, but I didn't think it was appropriate to call the city Bombay because I'm not Indian.
So just as a little background, the name was changed to Myanmar when there were the first free and fair elections, and the National League for Democracy won, and then the military regime decided not to honor the results, changed the name to Myanmar. And Myanmar is the ethnic majority group's elevated or literary, they have like a literary language, name for their own ethnic group. So it's actually was a radical assertion of this country is ethnic majority group. So there are two reasons why many of us in the human rights adjacent, Burma adjacent world at the time decided to not call it, go with the name change. One, because an illegitimate regime that didn't honor the elections made the name change, which is also why the US government still uses officially Burma. I think, I don't know about now, but anyway, as of a few months ago. But the other reason is that for it's such a discriminatory name. Now we could talk about the naming of the country. So Burma is also refers to the ethnic majority group because their non-literary word for themselves is Bama. The British gave the country that name, Burma, during the colonial era. But Burmese became what the ethnic majority and minority peoples recognized as the inclusive term for all of Burma's inhabitants. And Burman refers to the ethnic majority. This is a little bit nitpicky, but the point is Burma represents a more inclusive Burma, and the ethnic minority groups make up between 30 and 40, maybe even higher percent of the population. So it's a lot of the population that's being erased by the new name. I'm now starting to sometimes use it, and I think other Myanmar, because it's been so long, but.
Thank you for, it's a masterful moderation. And, but I guess I wanted to think about I'm trying to make my question, comprehensible, the belonging that's in the title of this conversation. And, what I hear from, each of you, literature or art, or how you use it for perspective, or to offer new perspectives. But personally, I often find myself looking to literature, since I'm a literary translator, specifically literature, but any form, any art form, to identify. I find identification in sometimes the most unlikeliest of places, and can be surprised, for instance, grief. When I'm grieving, it's not the book about grief that's going to offer solace. It's who knows. And so I guess I'm wondering if there is a perspective or an experience you've had where you've found that sense of belonging in just a surprising place.
I think that you write a book and it goes out into the world, and then when people read it and they respond to it, then suddenly you feel like, oh, I wasn't this weirdo writing the story, I actually belonged to this community. So with my first novel, The Tattooed Soldier, it was small press, and I didn't have that many readers at first, but there was this one particular Salvadoran, Central American student group at Pasadena City College. And this one young man had read it, and he said that his father was from El Salvador and had been through the Civil War but never talked about it. And he said he gave his father my book. And the father read my book, and the young man said it was the first book my father ever read in English. And he read your book, Mr. Tobar, and he told me, now you know, son, what I've been through. So that moment justified my career as a writer. you know? And it also gave me this sense of belonging. It's like, oh my God, you know, it's like our experience is part of this place. You know, it's in here. And that's happened to, you know, that happens when if you're lucky as a writer or as an artist and your work connects with people, it happens again and again in unexpected ways. I never would have predicted that. And so that to me, that not just the process of creating, but having people react to, consume the art, that's what really makes me feel like I belong.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, came here a few years ago, but then there's like, you know, for me personally, and maybe some of us who leave home, sometimes you have traumas around our own people. That like I was in the first few years, I don't want to be around any Palestinian or Gazan, you know, which is like really makes my heart, you know, like cry to think about it in this way. But also it's our journey to process things, because also we grew up around things that we had to go, you know, through with or without our choices. But I think almost a year or 2 years ago, I got reconnected with my Gazan friends, and that gave me a whole, you know, purpose and sense of belonging that somehow surprised me, which is I was like, what I was doing the whole time since October 7th, just sitting in my apartment by myself, grieving and, you know, hating my life every day for existing. And then finding them, and now like, okay, now we can feel each other's pains together, and also we can laugh about, you know, stories and have dark humor about specific things, or, you know, cry together or hug each other, or just, you know, tell stories about through our memories. And so this gives me definitely a sense of belonging that surprised me, unsurprised me in a way. And what else? Cooking food gives me belonging. So I love that. So I'm hungry now. Yeah, but I think that also made me, I feel, survive in the past couple of years in a way, which is, okay, I'm home. I don't know what to do with anything in my life, but I would every day make a meal that reminds me of like of home, you know, my mom, my grandma, and I'll invite a friend or just eat it myself and have my cat watch me. So, so those things give me a sense of belonging, I would say.
What I was going to say is maybe I was going to talk about my belonging with literature, because I was a very shy child growing up in Los Angeles. Is that working now? Yes. And I think that had something to do with not fitting in, being weird looking. No, you know, everyone feels different when they're little, but I think I felt acutely different and very shy. And the temptation was to retreat into invisibility and silence. And I still have that built in, a kind of, oh, it's just so much easier to make myself small and quiet. And because then you can't upset anybody. There's probably a lot of generational trauma in there. And so writing feels very fraught for me, necessary. There's obviously a part of me that longs to find, to express and to find form for my expression. But I guess what I want to say is just that it is very beautiful to feel a sense of belonging as a reader and a communing with an author who may be long gone, from a totally different context, moved as a human to human. And there's also something so beautiful and lovely for, I think for any of us, but just from my position of wanting to kind of hide and be silent and speaking through that vehicle to others, touching someone is a kind of belonging. It's powerful.
I wasn't expecting to be put on the spot, but I will say, because this is the first thing that as I was listening to Charmaine, at this moment, these kinds of conversations make me feel that belonging. Because it is, again, we talked about home not being a geography not being a single time place, so many things, senses. But it is really community, and it transcends borders. That's belonging. So when you put together a group of complete strangers, we just all met this evening. And to be able to hold a conversation that is this rich, both intellectually rigorous and emotionally deep, immensely deep, that I feel that belonging. And the longing that's in the belonging, like I long for this. This is what I long for all the time. So what a privilege to be here today, to be a part of this. Thank you. Being mindful of time, I don't want this to end ever. However, there's a world out there that we have to face. Thank you all so much for your participation. Thank you all for being here with us. My one hope from this evening, I really want to say this, my one hope is that when you walk away, you just don't take just that idea of, displacement and loss and hardship, but really the resilience, human dignity, moral imagination, because I think that's really what we talked about and what's most important and at stake.